Aita for going on a trip without telling my parents after they canceled my birthday. My older sister Emily 34F is the golden child, married, 3 adorable but chaotic kids, a nice house in the suburbs, living the perfect life my parents always dreamed of. Meanwhile, I live alone in a small apartment in Denver with a job I like, but I'm not passionate about and surprised no kids or stable partner to present at family gatherings. I guess that automatically makes me less important. Growing up, Emily was always the responsible one. I was the troublemaker. I admit I wasn't a saint, skipped classes, came home late 1,000,000 times, even failed chemistry in high school. When I got to college, I straightened up, graduated with a finance degree, got a good job and have been building my life little by little. However, it seems no matter what I do, my parents are always waiting for me to screw up. Fast forward to the present. My birthday was last month. For the first time in a long time, I was excited. I had a whole weekend planned, quiet dinner at a local brewery with friends and a family barbecue the next day. My parents even said they'd bring my favorite dessert, something they hadn't done in years. It seemed like finally they were giving me some priority, but nothing in my family ever goes as planned. 3 days before my birthday, my mom called. From the moment I answered, I knew something was wrong because she used that sweet fake tone she always uses when she's about to deliver bad news. She started with, "Honey, we love you very much." Never a good start. Then she launched into a monologue explaining that Emily's husband, Brian, had an emergency business trip that weekend, and Emily had no one to watch the kids. Apparently their regular babysitter was on vacation. Emily was desperate for help, so my mom said, "We're going to have to cancel the barbecue. Maybe we can make it to your dinner if we have time. Emily really needs us right now." I was in shock. Not only were they canceling the barbecue, but they were saying it like it was no big deal, like it was perfectly normal to ditch me to babysit my sister's kids. I tried to stay calm and replied, "This was already planned. Can't Emily find someone else? What about Brian's family?" My mom sighed, and I could practically hear her rolling her eyes through the phone. "Brian's parents are always busy and Emily is your sister. For goodness sake, family is there to help each other." I wanted to argue more, but I knew it would be pointless. This was the usual pattern. Emily had a problem and everyone dropped everything to fix it. It didn't matter that I had given them weeks of notice. Didn't matter that this was the only time in years I had asked them for something. When I hung up, I felt a mix of anger and sadness that I couldn't shake. Called my best friend Jake to vent. He listened patiently and then said, "Dude, you have to stop letting them walk all over you. If they're not going to celebrate your birthday, celebrate it yourself. Do something you really want to do." And that's when I got the idea, a solo trip. I had wanted to visit the Grand Canyon for years. There was always something that got in the way: work, money, family commitments. But now, my parents making it clear that they didn't care about my birthday. With no major plans, it seemed like the perfect time to do it. I checked my work schedule, packed my bags and didn't tell my parents I was leaving, partly because I didn't want to explain myself, and partly because I wanted to see if they even noticed I was gone. The trip was amazing. I blasted my favorite playlist, stopped at random restaurants and enjoyed the freedom of being alone. When I arrived at the Grand Canyon, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. I spent the weekend hiking, taking pictures and enjoying the views. It was exactly what I needed, a reminder that my life doesn't have to revolve around pleasing others. Of course, the peace didn't last long. Sunday night I checked my phone and saw a barrage of missed calls and texts from my parents. My mom's messages ranged from concerned, "Are you okay? We didn't see you at dinner," to manipulative, "Can't believe you left without telling us. Do you know how worried we were?" Even my dad, who rarely texts, wrote, "We need to talk when you get back." This was childish. Emily predictably also chimed in, "So typical of you, making everything about yourself." When I finally got home and called them, the conversation was intense to say the least. My mom accused me of being selfish, disrespectful for disappearing without a word. I replied that they didn't seem to care until they realized I wasn't there. The argument escalated quickly, bringing up all the family issues, my supposed immaturity, their blatant favoritism towards Emily, and the fact that they've never put me first. By the end, my dad was yelling, my mom was crying, and I was exhausted. I hung up knowing that nothing had really been resolved. Honestly, I didn't regret the trip. For the first time in years, I had done something just for me. After the call with my parents, I sat on my couch for a long time just processing everything. On one hand, I was furious. How could they act like I was the problem when they were the ones who had clearly decided that my birthday was less important than babysitting Emily's kids? But on the other hand, I also felt this deep sadness, like I had just confirmed something. I'd felt my whole life that I was only a priority when there was nothing else going on. A few days passed without much contact. I decided to focus my energy on work and planning my next move. While I loved my Grand Canyon trip, returning to reality reminded me that sooner or later, I have to face this family situation. Despite everything, I didn't want to cut off contact with my parents. Don't get me wrong, I was hurt. Cutting ties seemed too extreme, at least at that moment. So opted for the usual tactic, keep my distance until the storm calmed down. A few days later my mom called, again this time, tone was much calmer, or at least she was trying. She said something like, "Honey, I think we need to talk. I don't want this situation to get out of hand. Maybe we made a mistake, not prioritizing your birthday, but I don't think you handled it the best way by disappearing like that." I took a breath, trying not to explode, and said, "A mistake. Mom, this wasn't a simple mistake. You canceled my plans because Emily couldn't get organized. It's not the first time you've done this, but it was the last straw." She sighed, and then came the line she always uses to minimize things. "You don't have kids. You don't understand how hard it is to be a mother. Sometimes you have to make sacrifices for the good of the family." That made my blood boil. "I understand, Mom. But why am I always the sacrifice? Why do I always have to be the one who gives in, the one who adapts, the one who understands? You never asked the same of Emily or Brian. Always me." The conversation became even more tense. My dad got on the phone at one point and said something like, "We're not saying we don't love you, but you should try to see this from our point of view. Emily needed help. Those kids couldn't be left alone." "And what about me?" I replied. "I needed my family for once in my life." Was it so hard to tell Emily that this time you couldn't help? Their response, as always, was a silence that said it all. They had no arguments. They knew what they'd done was wrong. They never fully admitted. After that call, I decided I needed to put real distance between us, not just emotional. I talked to Jake again, and he suggested I take another trip, something to disconnect from the family drama. I love the idea. I started looking at destinations and ended up choosing Yellowstone. It was another place I'd always wanted to go. I felt like a nature trip would be just what I needed. I booked an Airbnb near the park and started planning my hiking routes. I didn't tell my parents or my sister, because frankly, I didn't feel like I owed them an explanation. I only told Jake and a couple of close friends. I took off work Friday and drove to Wyoming. The trip was incredible. The scenery, fresh air, the silence, everything helped me clear my head for a few days. I completely forgot about my family and all the drama. I focused on myself, on what I wanted, and on what made me happy. It was liberating as expected. Peace didn't last. On Sunday, after a long hike, checked my phone. There were several message and call notifications. Most were from my mom. There were also a few from Emily. I opened the messages out of curiosity, and the narrative had already shifted. "My mom, why are you ignoring us? We just want to talk to you. You left again without telling us. This isn't normal anymore. I hope how selfish you're being. You're pushing us away and hurting the family." Emily, on the other hand, had a much less maternal tone. "What are you trying to prove? What are you too busy for us? Is it so hard to be part of this family?" When I got home on Monday, I found an email from my dad. An email. It basically said that my attitude was immature, that I was trying too hard to prove I didn't need my family, and that this isn't what adults do. That's when something clicked in my head. All this time I've been waiting for my parents to change. Put me on the same level as Emily. After that last week, I realized something important. It was never going to happen. No matter what I did, they would always find a way to minimize my feelings and justify Emily's. In the end, I replied to my dad's email with a short direct message. "I get it. I'll never be a priority for you. I'm tired of trying. If you really want to talk about this, we can do it when you're ready to admit your mistakes, not mine." With that, I left the ball in their court. After sending that email, I decided to stop initiating contact with my parents and Emily. I was tired, emotionally drained. I had reached the point where I no longer had the energy to argue or try to justify myself. For the next few weeks, I tried to focus on my life. I went out more with friends, a couple of hobbies I had put aside, and started considering the idea of moving to another city far away from all this drama. However, peace didn't last. About 2 weeks after sending my email, my parents showed up at my door unannounced. They never do that. I knew they had something big up their sleeves. I froze when I saw them still in their jackets. They had decided last minute to come straight from their house. My mom had that. "We're going to solve this now." Look, while my dad seemed more resigned, like he didn't want to be there but felt obligated, I opened the door and said, "What are you doing here? I didn't ask you to come." My mom sighed deeply and said, "Honey, we can't go on like this. This is getting out of hand. It's not healthy for any of us. We need to talk." I didn't want to, but I knew they weren't going to leave until they said what they had to say. So I invited them in, offered them coffee, even though I really didn't want to prolong their visit. And we sat at my small dining table. My parents exchanged glances as if deciding who would start. Finally, my dad spoke. "We know we've made mistakes," he began. "Maybe we haven't always given you the attention you deserved, but you have to understand that it was never our intention to make you feel less important." Closed my eyes for a moment, trying to stay calm. This was a start, but not enough. So I replied, If you really understand that, why do you keep minimizing everything? I say, this problem isn't new. I've been feeling like a second-class citizen for years. Every time I mention it, I get excuses, not solutions. My mom chimed in. They're not excuses, honey. It's just that family is complicated. Emily has always had a lot of responsibilities and you've always been more independent. We thought you didn't need us as much. That comment stung more than I expected. I laughed sarcastically and said, independent? That's what you think. Maybe I had to be because I didn't have a choice, because you were always busy helping Emily. The conversation quickly intensified. I explained how I felt when they not only canceled my plans but did so without any remorse. I reminded them of all the times I'd had to adapt to Emily's needs while mine were ignored. Talked about past birthdays, family gatherings, and big and small decisions where it always seemed like my place was less important. My parents were silent for a moment. My mom, visibly emotional, said it wasn't our intention to make you feel this way. Maybe in our effort to help Emily, we forgot to balance things. But we never thought that what we were doing could hurt you so much. My dad, less emotional but equally serious, added, if we had known, we would have handled it differently. But we also want you to understand something. We're not perfect. We do the best we can. Sometimes we make mistakes. Although their words sounded sincere, something in me couldn't let it go so easily. So I asked, what are you going to do differently now? Because talking about this is fine, but if nothing changes, it's just going to be more of the same. My mom seemed to take a moment to process what I said before responding. We want to do better. We want to be more present for you, but we also need you to talk to us, not shut down or walk away like you've been doing lately. Comment made me feel a pang of guilt but also anger, so I replied, not talking, Mom. I've been trying to get you to listen for years. We always end up in the same place. I'm not shutting down for no reason. I'm shutting down because I'm tired. My dad held up his hands in a gesture of surrender. You're right. This isn't something we can fix in one conversation, but we want to try if you're willing. I didn't know how to respond to that. On one hand, I had waited for this kind of acknowledgement for years, but on the other, the wounds I carried weren't going to disappear overnight. I felt that if I gave them another chance, I could be opening the door to more disappointment. If I didn't, what then? Cut ties completely. After a long silence, I said, I'm not promising anything, but we can try. If you really want to fix this, you have to show it, not just say it. My parents seemed relieved, but I still felt distant. I walked them to the door, and before they left, my mom hugged me and said, thank you for giving us this chance, son. We know we don't deserve it, but we're going to try our best. I didn't respond, but I nodded, feeling more confused and relieved that night. Talked to my friend Jake and told him everything. His advice was clear. Give them a chance, but don't lower your standards. They disappoint you again. At least you'll know you did your part. And so I decided to wait and see what my parents did. But honestly, still doubted they could really change after so many years. The following weeks were strange to say the least. My parents seemed genuinely interested in making things right, although I wasn't sure how much of it was real and how much was just an attempt to appease me. They tested me more often, asking how I was and trying to start conversations they never would have initiated before. They even offered to visit me again. But this time I asked them to wait. I needed space to decide if I really wanted to continue this reconciliation effort, or if they were just prolonging the inevitable. Emily didn't take this new dynamic so well. It seems that my parents, in their attempt to balance things, were spending less time helping her, and that didn't go unnoticed. One afternoon I received a message from her that said something like, thanks for driving a wedge between Mom and Dad. Now they act like everything is your fault. And I'm the bad guy. Happy. That message made me laugh bitterly. It was so typical of Emily, making everything about her. I replied, I'm simply not putting up with it anymore, Emily. I'm just asking to be treated with the same respect as you. If that bothers you, that's your problem, not mine. I didn't get a response, which was a relief. A few weeks later, my parents invited me to dinner. They said they wanted to talk more about how to move forward and assured me that Emily wouldn't be there. Although I was hesitant, I accepted. I felt that if there was a time to see if they were truly willing to change, it was this. When I arrived at their house, the atmosphere was tense but also calm. My mom had made my favorite dish, a gesture she hadn't made since I was a teenager, and my dad seemed more relaxed than usual. We sat down at the table, and after the initial greetings and a bit of small talk, my dad got straight to the point. We want to apologize truly, he began. We've been doing a lot of thinking since we last spoke. We know we haven't been the parents you deserved. We can't change the past. But we want to show you that we're willing to change things from now on. My mom nodded, her eyes already filled with tears. We haven't been fair to you, and that's something I'll always regret. Emily has always needed more help, or at least we thought, and in the process we neglected you. But that doesn't mean we don't love you, or that we don't value who you are. We just want a chance to show you that we can do better. Although their words were sincere, couldn't help but feel skeptical. It wasn't the first time they had told me something similar. So I replied calmly, but firmly, I don't need words, I need actions. If you really want to show that this is going to change, you'll have to do it over time. I'm willing to try, but I won't accept anything less than a real effort. They both nodded solemnly. They seemed to understand that this wasn't going to be easy or immediate. Dinner continued in relative calm. Although I still felt that emotional distance between us after years of feeling ignored, I wasn't going to open up completely overnight. However, it was nice to have a conversation where it seemed like for the first time they were really listening to me. The end of the night when I said goodbye, my mom hugged me and said, "Thank you for giving us this chance, son. We know we don't deserve it, but we're going to show you that we can change." I drove home feeling confused. On one hand, I wanted to believe them. I wanted this to be the start of a new chapter in our relationship. But on the other, I was afraid that everything would go back to the way it always was, and I wasn't sure if I could handle another disappointment. The following days passed without much drama. My parents continued trying to stay in touch, although this time in a less invasive way. They sent me casual messages asking about my day, but without pressuring me to respond. I also noticed they were trying to be more neutral with Emily, which honestly was a small relief. But the real test came a few weeks later, when a small incident with Emily put everything to the test again. One Saturday, I received an unexpected call from my sister. She sounded agitated, as she always did when something didn't go her way. She told me that Brian was out of town and that she needed urgent help with the kids because mom and dad aren't available. Hearing that, I knew something was up. Emily never came to me for these kinds of things. She always went straight to my parents. I asked, "Why aren't they available? What happened?" She was silent for a moment before responding, visibly annoyed. "They said they were busy. What does it matter? Can you come or not?" I wanted to say no. I wanted to make it clear that it wasn't my responsibility to solve her problems. But at the same time, I knew that this could be an opportunity to see if anything had really changed with my parents. So I replied, "Let me talk to them first." I called my mom, and when she answered until she was nervous, she explained that indeed Emily had asked them for help, but this time they had decided to say no, because they wanted to stick to their decision to not always prioritize her over me. "We thought it was time for Emily to learn to handle these things herself," my mom said, "and we also thought that if she really needed help, she could ask you for a change." I didn't know how to respond to that. It was the first time in a long time that I felt like my parents were really trying to balance things. However, I was also annoyed that they were using this situation to prove a point. It wasn't my job to pick up the pieces when they didn't want to get involved. After hanging up, called Emily and told her I couldn't help her, making up an excuse about being busy. I didn't want to step into the role my parents had occupied for so long. When I hung up, felt strangely relieved. For the first time in a long time, it seemed like things were changing, although there was still a long way to go. After the incident with Emily, things in my family took an unexpected turn. For the first time, it seemed like my parents were genuinely trying to correct their behavior. I noticed small changes that, although modest, were significant. They called to ask how I was doing, and not just to talk about Emily or her kids. They stopped inviting me to gatherings where they knew I'd be uncomfortable. And most surprisingly, they started acknowledging when they were wrong. However, my relationship with Emily remained a disaster. Ever since my parents told her no that one time, her attitude towards me shifted from indifference to openly hostile. She ignored me in family chats and didn't miss an opportunity to make sarcastic comments about how now everyone had to adjust to my needs. One day during a family video call, it exploded. The topic of conversation was a possible family trip for the holidays, something we hadn't done together since I was a teenager. My parents suggested they consult me before deciding on dates, since they knew my work schedule was complicated. That's when Emily blurted out, "Since when do your lives revolve around him? You've spent your whole lives doing what's best for this family, and now it turns out we have to adapt to his whims." The tension on the call was palpable. My parents tried to mediate, but I was tired of staying calm. I replied, "Emily, this has nothing to do with whims. My whole life I've adapted to you. While you've had all the attention, it's time for things to be different." She laughed bitterly. Tension. "Are you listening to yourself? You have no idea what it's like to deal with the weight of responsibility I've always had. Do you know how hard it is to raise 3 kids and manage everything while you go on trips to find yourself?" That comment hit me, but I stood my ground. "No, I don't know what it's like to raise 3 kids, Emily. I do know what it's like to grow up feeling like I was never enough for this family. If you need everyone to keep prioritizing you to feel important, not my problem." The conversation ended abruptly. My parents tested me later, apologizing for not intervening enough. Strangely enough, I wasn't that bothered by what Emily said. I think I had already accepted that she was never going to see things from my perspective. What mattered to me was that my parents, at least this time, didn't automatically back her up like they used to. A few weeks later, something unexpected happened. I received a call from my mom. This time it wasn't to ask me for anything or to mediate another conflict. She simply wanted to share something she had been thinking about. She said, "I know we haven't been fair to you, and I want to thank you for having the patience to give us another chance. I've been thinking a lot about how we treated Emily and you differently. We always assumed that because she had more responsibilities you could manage. Now that she said it, I didn't know exactly how to feel." I finally responded, "Thanks for saying that, Mom. All I want is for you to see me for who I am, not as a problem or a lesser responsibility. If we're working on that, then it's worth trying." That was a key moment for me. Although I knew the process would be long and that the wounds of the past wouldn't disappear easily, I felt like this was a genuine step toward something better over time. My relationship with my parents continued to improve. It wasn't perfect. There were still times when the old dynamics resurfaced, but the difference was that now they seemed to be more aware of their actions. They apologized when necessary, and most importantly, they started including me more in their lives in a way that didn't feel forced. As for Emily, the relationship remained distant. But that was okay with me. I no longer felt the need to seek her approval or try to convince her of my point of view. She was living her life and I was living mine. If you liked it, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the next story.